For further analysis, I'm joined by Professor of International Studies, Eun-jung from Kongju National University. Professor Lim, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
So first, I'm going to ask you, the South Korea-U.S. Japan three-way meeting came on the heels of two Korea-Japan summits, one in Tokyo, the other in Seoul, and one Korea-U.S. summit in Washington over a 2-month. Although the meeting was short, is this a culmination of a three-way cooperation?
I think so. This looks like we can, I think, regard this moment as a reconfirmation, even though the meeting itself was very short, which is understandable because, again, President Zelenskyy from Ukraine, he finally made his trip to the Hiroshima, which was a little unexpected because originally he was planning to show himself, virtually, but finally, again, he came to the Hiroshima. So even though we do have many other issues on the table, but still the attention actually went to the President Zelenskyy and the war in Ukraine. So having had this kind of, again, the change the situation, the trilateral meeting itself became pretty much shorter than expected, but still, as you just explained, we consecutively have had several summits again over the last few months, and this trilateral meeting again among the President Biden, Yoon, and Prime Minister Kishida was, I would say, it was a reconfirmation of the importance of trilateral cooperation.
Right, some collaboration. And last time when they met in Cambodia 6 months ago, they agreed on real-time information sharing on North Korea's missiles. How do you assess what we learned from today in their trilateral meeting in dealing with North Korea's nuclear and missile threats?
You know, this is really the most urgent threat and security threat, not only just from South Korea's point of view, from Japan's point of view too. We can complement each other, I think, because, you know, again, the planet is round. So we have, of course, our own strength in our intelligence system. When they, for example, launch it, of course, we can be earlier than, again, the Japan or any other country to catch up with the information, where we do have a very strong human intelligence capability. But at the same time, Japan has its own strength too, because usually the missiles go down to the Japan side, so they can collect their own information as well. So if we can combine all this information together, we can have more perfect, comprehensive picture to analyze, again, the North Korea's missile system. So in that sense, the complementarity between the two countries is pretty big. So that is why I think the U.S. has kept emphasizing the importance of intelligence information sharing among the three countries. So, you know, we already, as you just explained, we already agreed on that in Cambodia last year. And I think, and we also have a very important declaration, which is called the Washington Declaration. U.S. and Korea, we agreed on making the NCG, Nuclear Consultative Group. So it's now on the orbit too. So of course it's going to take time, but I think these three countries will develop, again, all this cooperative mechanism.
Some important, very important security talks there. And earlier this morning, President Yoon and Japanese Prime Minister Kishida and their wives visited a memorial park in Hiroshima and honored Korean victims of the atomic bombs in 1945. And right after that, they had the second bilateral meeting in 2 weeks. So what does this mean for the Seoul-Tokyo relationship?
Well, this was a historic moment for myself, in my own view too. It will be, I think, unforgettable moment. If I just, you know, explain a little bit more about these victims, Korean victims who still remain in Japan. Again, these people have been underrepresented. Of course, you know, in the Japanese political environment, all these nuclear bomb victims, they do have their own political voice in the Japanese society. But, you know, the Korean victims have been much more marginalized, even in this context. The other side too, when we deal with all this, the so-called victims, I cannot say that Korea's responses was enough again to deal with again this serious issue. There were several reasons, but one of the reasons was again Korea historically. Even though Japan is the only country who got the nuclear attack by the United States, but originally, if we just recall all this history, who caused the war, right? Japan was the one who caused the war. So in the Korean society, we have been much more cautious about mentioning whatever those victim side of the Japanese history. Because we absolutely, we Korean people, we do know Japan was the one, again, who invaded other country or who caused the Pacific War. So from this context, again, the Korean victims have been underrepresented in this society too. So from both sides, again, this group of people have been underrepresented, which certainly was painful years for the people. So this time, of course, President Yoon, he said, I'm sorry because the state was not by you, beside you when you were suffering. So that kind of again wording or gesture, again, the Prime Minister Kishida, actually he suggested to go there. So this kind of thing is really, again, the meaningful moment when we recall this, what happened in the past, even though we want to be more future-oriented. So this was, again, pretty much, I think, a historic moment in the context of the Korea-Japan relations.
Right, so shedding light on those underrepresented.
Right.
And Professor, Ukrainian President Zelenskyy dominated this year's G7 summit. He also met President Yoon for the first time. So what do you read from President Yoon's busy diplomatic schedule in terms of his value-based diplomacy?
Well, Korea, again, the South Korea, this is a trading country. South Korea is one of the biggest trading country in the world. So for the country like South Korea, international environment, when we have very peaceful, cooperative, or open international circumstances, that's the best environment for South Korea-like country. So we don't actually want this kind of so-called new Cold War-like situation. Of course, we didn't make this, but time flies and then situations really have changed. And especially since Russia invaded the Ukraine last year, things really accelerated. So having had all this, pretty much challenging security threats, this government, again, the President Yoon have kept emphasizing the importance of the rule of law or justice, democracy, and so on. So this kind of value diplomacy, some group of us will say this is not actually useful, or this can be against our national interests because we need to be more pragmatic. Right? So that kind of criticism, of course, is there domestically. But still, again, as I mentioned, the situation changed. And in addition to this, I will emphasize, when international environment is rooted in the rule of law or all other those, common senses, that will be the time or environment which is good for South Korea-like country because again we are the trader, and in terms of size we are in the between. We are not the superpower,
middle power,
power exactly. So for middle power like country again, we definitely want more rule-based international society.
All right, and Professor Lim, in a joint statement, the group of 7 leaders strongly condemned North Korea's ballistic missile launches, calling them unprecedentedly frequent. How do you assess this?
It has been increasing and increasing. This year only, today is May 21, but until today, this year only, they have conducted 50 times, which means like almost every other week they have conducted a missile. This is just outrageous, especially since the Kim Jong-un years. All this frequency, not only just frequency, the level of the all this provocation has been just rising. Of course, at the end of the day, of course, North Korea, I don't think they do want war either. I don't think so. However, they have been just upgrading all this, missile and the nuclear capability to probably, of course, to defend themselves. But at the same time, they are trying to elevating their so-called negotiations power, right? When at some point, we definitely need to sit down and talk. So, that is the rationale why, again, the North Korea has been, again, upgrading their capacity. But this is really, again, as I mentioned, outrageous. And South Korea cannot just deal with all this, outrageous threats. So we definitely need a cooperation, of course, with our ally first, again, the U.S., but some other, not only just Japan, even China, or European countries, Australia, regional country. These countries need to pay attention to this really serious issue, and we need to just make a collective voice to avoid any war in this region, or to avoid any serious exchanges of violences. In that sense, this G7 summit, that joint communique, which was pretty much, I think, encouraging for South Korea people.
And Professor, the G7 mentioned the importance of peace and stability in Taiwan.
Right.
And they criticized any unilateral attempts to change the status quo by force in the East and South China Seas. But at the same time, they say they will stand prepared to build constructive relations with China. What does this mean?
Well, of course, cross-strait issue, the Taiwan Strait issue, is really serious issue. Of course, China is always very much sensitive with anything related to Taiwan Strait issue. But what we or the rest of the world wants to see is, again, the stability and peace in this region. And especially geographically speaking, this region is crucial for Korea too, because if you think about all this transportation, especially oil or gas-like energy from Persian Gulf region or Southeast Asia, they have to just go through the South and East China Sea. So stability in this region is crucial for the regional members and other countries too. So in that sense, again, we have to emphasize the importance of the stability, but at the same time, China is still Korea's largest trading partner. And not only just that, again, we have been, not only just South Korea, many other countries, even G7 countries, have been dependent on the Chinese, those manufacturing capacity, and especially critical mineral when we trying to expand the renewable energy. Again, this has been, again, we all have been dependent on the Chinese, again, the production. So having had this kind of mixed situations, I think not only just G7, many other countries want to be very cautious when we deal with China, because we, of course, we respect China's one China policy. And plus, again, we want stability. So anything that will be threatening the status quo or stability, peace of the region, that should be avoided. So in that sense, again, the G7 countries was trying to emphasize that.
All right. And before we let you go, Professor, what message do you read from this group in terms of the rules-based international order with the Russian invasion of Ukraine in mind?
Yeah, Russia's that invasion, well, some will say, NATO's expansion was triggering or stimulating or even aggravating the Russia. So-called offensive realism, like a theory, will even criticize the West. Again, that you guys stimulate Russia unnecessarily. Well, whether or not you agree with that kind of view, still the one who caused the war was Russia. This is the fact. And as long as the fact is like that, again, that kind of behavior should not be repeated by any country. So that message is really necessary, important for a country like South Korea too, because we experienced that too, right, in the 1950s. So definitely we need to stand up together against that kind of, again, violence, that is trying to change or that is trying to interrupt some other country's sovereignty.
All right, Professor Lim, many thanks for your insight.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.